Welcome back to another edition of the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. I am Paul Perdichizzi, and thank you for joining me as always. Here at Saturday to Sunday, we continue to cover all things the 2024 NFL Draft. We broke down every single team, division by division, with draft recap shows. We had Dynasty rookie rankings. We had my initial IDP rookie rankings last episode. And tonight, I'm so excited to bring on back to the Saturday to Sunday podcast. I think you were on either 2 years ago or last year. It's Kyle Bellefeuil from Football Guys. Kyle, welcome back to the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast.
Oh, man, thanks for having me on. Excited to talk rookies and some IDP and exchange some thoughts and see where we land in some of these guys, man.
Absolutely. So at first, before we even get into specifics, general overview of this class, because my take was I kind of don't remember being this lackluster in terms of IDP rookies in quite some time. Is that the general consensus? You think I'm missing out on it? I just don't see a lot to get too excited about.
I definitely get that, man. I think this year is a really good year for tiered rankings, right? Pick the players you like, put them in a tier at each position, and if you can get a guy in that tier of players you like, grab them. If you don't like the next tier, move on to the next position. Because I'm with you. It's kind of all over the place where the strengths and weaknesses are with these positions and the class overall, man. It's like we kind of were talking about a little bit before we started. It's kind of a weird class, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing I think that always needs to be discussed when you're talking about a podcast about IDP rankings is every league is so different in terms of the positional settings, between the scoring settings, how many you play, what classifications. Is it premium? Maybe like defensive tackles. Sometimes defensive tackles aren't even drafted because of the settings. Sometimes they are. There's so many factors. I think we've at least hopefully got into a more universal where the edge guys are classified as edge guys. We don't have the outside linebacker nonsense like we used to have to deal with in the IDP world. But it's just, we saw it, 14 players started the draft from the offensive side, right? We didn't have a lot of defensive players. And even on day 2, we didn't have as many of those guys where we usually see the linebackers fly off the board in terms of the top guys. We had a couple mixed in. And I think I kind of want to start there at the linebacker position. How do you kind of sort out the top? You talked about tiered rankings. For you, is it a tier of 2? Is it a tier of 3? Is there one that stands alone and he's by himself in a tier and then a tier below him? How do you see the top of the IDP linebacker rankings?
Yeah, it's I definitely, if you look around at rankings all over, you're going to see, Edgerrin Cooper, Junior Colson are the big two. Peyton Wilson is a player I absolutely like. Pre-draft, he was my LB1. The dude is built for IDP production. He's a maniac. He's got the size, speed, overall game. I have him as my third linebacker. I have Cooper 1, Colson 2. I like both those guys a lot. I like the landing spots. I'm not in love with Wilson's landing spot in Pittsburgh, just their linebacker deployment. They don't typically deploy 2 full-time guys. They paid Patrick Queen. They brought Elena Roberts back. It sounds like Cole Holcomb's still kind of struggling with that brutal leg injury. We're not really sure when he's going to be back. But, I just kind of believe in Peyton Wilson's talent. And maybe he can, once he hits the field, he's going to be one of those guys that's kind of hard to take off. I would just love to see him be able to grab 70-75% snap share and see what he could do with it. Would be great. Where, like Edgerrin Cooper and Colson, I think rookies all have to earn their stripes, right? It just kind of seems that way, especially in the IDP side of things. But, the Packers, Cooper fits what they look for in linebackers. He's taller, longer, athletic linebackers. He kind of fits the bill there. There was a need there. So we got a new system coming in. I think Cooper's going to fit nicely. He's going to have to fight with Isaiah McDuffie, who is a Jeff Hafley player from their days in Boston College. But I think eventually he's going to work his way into a job there down the road, maybe later in the year. And Junior Colson going to the Chargers with his old coach, Harbaugh. You got to love that, right? Deion Henley was a guy they drafted in the 3rd round last year. He was a guy from the previous regime. I think Colson's a better player. I think he's built better for IDP production. He's such a sound tackler, athletic, checks all the boxes there as an athlete. So those 3 guys are in a tier for me. I could see it being 2 if you're not in love with Peyton Wilson's landing spot.
Yeah, I think you make some great points there. And for me, Colson was my linebacker 1 film evals prior to the draft. I
like
love
that.
the fact that he ended up with Harbaugh because I do think he looks at him as a guy who's going to set the tone on that defense and the style of play that he wants. So even though that's a little bit of a crowded depth chart, and like you said, one of the previous rookies is from a previous regime, I think he's going to get on the field. I'd actually be surprised if he doesn't get an opportunity to maybe be opening day starter, and if not, very soon after. Would you say it's Cooper a little bit of a break, or do you think in terms of like draft projection position, if you're saying, I think Cooper can go off the board mid-round 2, you'd be okay with Colson there? Is that the general range? Would you be okay to dial up these guys early round 2 in a rookie draft, like obviously blended in with offensive guys as well? Where would you be comfortable kind of maybe starting to take Cooper or Colson off the board?
Yeah, in your aggressive IDP tackle heavy leagues, I'm cool with, mid-second. And if you feel like you got to get him 202, 203, 204, and he's your guy, I get it. But like mid-second for sure. And, like you nailed it before, Paul. Like all these leagues settings are different, right? You got to know your league a little bit. But I'm with it mid-second with those two. I think they're in great spots. And I think, you make a good point with Colson. He's like, I'm reluctant to say these guys are going to hit the field right away as rookies, especially a third round linebacker like Colson, but like you couldn't ask for a better fit. Right. And like you said, he was your LB1 pre-draft. He was right up there with me. I think he was 2 for me. And I'm a Michigan fan, so he pulls on my heartstrings and he's back with his coach. So I'm with you. I think he's one of these like guys that could break the mold and like hit the field running right away as a rookies. Cause the transition to the scheme, he knows it. He knows Minter scheme. He knows Harbaugh. Like it could be a smooth transition for him as long as he can stay healthy and adjust to the speed of the NFL.
Absolutely. For me, those 3 guys, it's kind of that's the end of the comfort level at linebacker position. Like for me, when I was kind of talking about these and tearing it out, I had a small tier next. I'd be interested to see. For me, it was Trevin Wallace and Cedric Gray because I think they could step into a starter role maybe by year 2 and kind of work their way there. Are those 2 guys in your next tier? Is there anybody else that gets to join the party of those 2, or is it those 2? And if so, do you have a preference between Wallace and Gray?
Yeah, I have the same thing. I have Gray and Wallace in a tier, and I have Gray ahead of Wallace right now. I just think he's a little more farther along, like as a processor. He's such an experienced player. He did slip to the 4th round, but it's a pretty soft landing in Tennessee. They brought in Kenneth Murray. Azeez Al-Shair's gone to Houston. They brought in Kenneth Murray. Jack Gibbons has been solid in his part-time role. But after that, there's really not much there. And Gray has a chance. If he can clean up those missed tackles, I think he's got a good shot to really make some noise next year, maybe end of this year if things aren't looking great. And then Wallace, Wallace he's fun because he's just so trait-wise, he's so athletic, explosive. Dude's, well put together, fast. He's got burst. Like if his eyes catch up to his athletic traits, he could really be fun. And you look at Carolina, they brought in Josie Jewell. They paid him pretty well. I think he knows the Evero defense from his time in Denver. He looks like the guy who's likely to lead the unit. Jack Thompson had that tough fibula injury last year of his contract. Guessing Carolina is going to have another tough year. Should be a little better, I hope, for them. But if they're in the tank late in the year, maybe they give Wallace a little run if he's picking things up. And 2025 could be a nice. You could be pretty pumped if he's on your taxi squad in 2025.
Yeah, and not that we're ever really going to draft a linebacker for what I'm about to say, but I do think Wallace is one of those guys that he's going to have once he gets an opportunity to play. If he earns that starting job, I think he's going to have some sneaky value in getting us some sack points because I do think his athletic ability and his explosiveness. They're going to blitz him. You would be doing a disservice if you didn't send him blitzing. So he might be a guy that, like, if he could become a solid tackle producer, and then all of a sudden he kind of sneaks into 4 or 5, sacks off of blitzes, all of a sudden that extra point starts to materialize, and you have a couple spiked weeks in there. Could be something that's worth fantasy viable. So that's kind of why, I have him and Gray basically in that tier together. I have Wallace slightly higher because of a ceiling, but I said on my previous episode, I think Gray's got the higher floor. Wallace the higher ceiling of those 2 guys. After that, I think everyone else look at as kind of a stash and wait and see. where do you kind of maybe talk me through a couple of your guys that you like next? If you're like, you know what, round 4, round 5, I'm going to stash somebody and see what happens. Who are a couple other names after the 5 guys we've talked about who you would say these would be the guys that I would kind of pinpoint and star as maybe I'll get them, put them somewhere, and kind of wait to see if they ever get an opportunity?
Yeah, next guy for me is a guy I liked pre-draft, pre-combine when I got to watch his tape was Tyrese Knight out of UTEP. It's a good landing spot, really, for a 4th-round linebacker because they lost Jordan Brooks, they lost Bobby Wagner in Seattle. They brought in Tyrell Dodson, Jerome Baker on 1-year deals, right? Mike McDonald takes over. This is the guy he drafted. Seattle was a prime spot for one of those top names we were talking about: Cooper, Colson, Wilson, right? We were looking like Seattle for me was like, I'm like, okay, are they going to pull the trigger on one of these guys on day 2? They went with Knight round 4. He was a productive player at UTEP. And I thought he showed well, like when he trusts his reads and he's got good bursts getting downhill in the run game. And we like that for IDP because he can get downhill and fill the gap and make tackles. And if he can really shine here in training camp, whatever, get in the mix, I don't expect him to like take one of those jobs. I think they want to see what Tyrell Dodson could be. He flashed there in Buffalo, and they got like a 1-year deal with him. We know what Jerome Baker is. He's been around the league. He struggled to stay healthy. Whatever. But, like you said, as far as a guy to take a stab on late and stash, I like Tyrese Knight because if he comes along this year, next year he could be a name they're looking at, so, and I kind of like this tape too. I thought he was an intriguing player. I kind of liked what he brings at the line of scrimmage. So, and then just another guy that I'm kind of looking to stash was Jordan McGee in Washington. He's kind of a late riser too. I think Daniel Jeremiah was on him pretty well. And he's a fun player. He's a little, taller, slender build, but he kind of fits today's game. He's a rangy player. He can play in coverage. He plays with a pretty physical like temperament for a guy of his, smaller size stature. But in Washington, they got a new regime there with Dan Quinn taking over. They brought in Frankie Lou, who paid him pretty well, who'd be there. Bobby Wagner is on a 1-year deal. He's still balling at his age. He's still getting it done, but he's on a 1-year deal. And talk about a guy to learn from, right? So McGee's another one of those guys that I'm looking to stash in those deeper drafts, deeper leagues of taxi squads.
Yeah, Knight for me is my 6, McGee is my 7, so we see that similarly.
Yeah, I like that.
What do you do with somebody like, Maris Liafu, if I'm saying it correctly,
a
guy who wasn't expected to go, if you looked at the consensus big board, if you looked at even like just focus in on like the main draft experts, he was not a guy expected to go off the board anywhere where he did. Dallas makes the investment in, puts in decent draft capital to him. How do you kind of reconcile that when you're doing your rankings? Do you kind of take out pre-draft and consensus board kind of out the window and you're like, listen, the Cowboys invested this pick in him. They're going to have expectations for him. Does it force you post-draft to kind of adjust like what your initial take was on him, and kind of maybe slide him up rankings because that draft capital we know does carry some weight in terms of opportunity, in terms of, the leash that some of these guys have? How do you kind of take that into consideration with a guy like that who really went up much higher than I think most people expected?
Yeah, I think you absolutely nailed it there. He's the perfect candidate for that situation for me. I didn't love his tape necessarily. There's flashes. He's got long arms. He's got a solid build. He's high energy, man. The hair's flying around, and he comes blitzing hard off the edge, making plays, tracking guys down, backside pursuit, blitzing. But like against the run, it was a lot of ups and downs as far as like processing, being in the right spot at the right time. So I was kind of lower on him pre-draft, like you said. I didn't see him going 3rd round, but the draft capital means something. Situation means something. Mike Zivers taking over that defense. They brought in Eric Kendricks, who knows Zimmer's scheme to run it, as he installs it. And then you got a bunch of holdovers and Damone Clark and like Marquise Bell was a tweener. DeMarvion Overshown got hurt last year. We didn't get to see nothing, but he, definitely I think it's a great call because I think Liufau is like the perfect candidate for the guy that got moved up because he went in the 3rd round. It wasn't necessarily the highest on his tape, but hey, it means something. And it's one of those things you got to like take into consideration. So he's one I've moved up ahead of players that I had higher, pre-draft. So
yeah, I think we can't get locked into our takes because it's something I've talked a lot about Saturday to Sunday. When we get locked into those takes, like we have to realize that one, we don't have nearly as much access to what the NFL teams do, and they're going to favor. It's just it's the lay of the land. They're going to put more resource in development in terms of the early round picks. The guys are going to have longer leashes, et cetera, et cetera. So when a guy goes in the, third or fourth round and we might have thought sixth or seventh or UDFA or whatever the case may be, he's going to they usually get opportunities, right? So it's one of those things that we have to make sure we adjust for when we're talking rookie rankings, whether it's offense, defense, whatever. I do think it's important. Sometimes we don't see, some people kind of get stuck on their pre-draft takes a little bit, and I think that can get us in trouble a little bit. Let's shift this over to the edge group. And when I talked about these guys in my previous pod, I said the top here, we were talking about tiers, right? Most tiers, I think, are going to put Latu, Jared Verse, and Dallas Turner probably in that top tier. If yours is different, please discuss. But I do think it's one of those things where I'm interested to kind of hear how you have them ranked, because I look at it as, for me, there's a guy who's the highest ceiling. This is a guy who's got the highest floor. And then there's a kind of a mix between high ceiling and high floor that I put at the top. But I do think I could see somebody's rationale for arranging them in any which way in terms of those top three. Is there someone else in the mix at the top for you? Is it those three guys, Latu, Verse, and Turner? And if so, how do you kind of sort through them in terms of when you're making your rankings?
Yeah, it's a tier of those three guys for me: Latu, Turner, Verse. And I'm with you. You could make an argument in any order for those guys. They're all talented. They bring a little something to the table. I have Latu first. I just absolutely love his game. I think he's NFL ready. I know he's a little bit older than like Dallas Turner, but I just think like he is an advanced pass rusher right away. Super productive, 23.5 sacks the last 2 years. A 94.3 pass rush grade was like the highest, and I think it might have been the highest pass rush grade in FBS. I mean, just a stellar final campaign there at UCLA. The biggest thing with him is the medicals, right? During the neck injury issues at Washington, but he's been really durable his last 2 years at UCLA. Obviously, Indianapolis was comfortable with what they saw in the medicals. He was the guy who cracked the defensive shell for us, I guess we'll call it, after trying to find the word there, after 14 offensive players went, like you said. I just think when he hits the field, he's going to hit the ground running, just because he's got one of the best pass repertoires in this class, if not the best, and his game's NFL ready right away. So I have him one. I have Dallas Turner two. He's young. I think he's 21. Just checks all the boxes athletically. He's got the length. Alabama product that doesn't hurt. He goes to Brian Flores in Minnesota, who is going to get the best out of him. I think he's got that aggressive defensive scheme. I like the spot. And then Jared Verse, to another guy. I'm a huge fan of all three of these guys. Like, you could talk to me tomorrow and I might flip flop a couple of them, but Verse, I think he's got a good get off for a guy his size. His bull rush is really impressive. There was a rep against Florida where he threw the tackle right into the quarterback. It's just like, the dude is super fun to watch, and he lands with the Rams, and like the opportunity, he has the best opportunity year one of the three for me, because Byron Young was fantastic last year for the Rams as a 3rd round pick. Michael Hecht, however you want to pronounce it. I'm not sure I ever get that right. He was one of those like production by volume edge rushers for us in IDP. He's like an oversized edge that they've slid in there, and he's been fine for what the player is, and he's been solid. But like, Verse has a lot more to offer, and he's just a better player. So I think there's opportunity, because Young and Hecht ate a lot of snaps last year, and I just can't see them playing a boatload of snaps with Verse. They're ready to go. So no, it's a big tier of three. I have it Latu, Turner, Verse, and I could see it any other way.
Yeah, I think, I kind of said that I think Turner's the guy with the highest ceiling, Verse is the guy with the highest floor, and then Latu kind of combines the two, because if you told me fast forward a couple of years, who's the consistent double-digit sack guy, I would say Latu. If there's a guy who's going to have a 15-sack season, I think it's Dallas Turner. And then if you take me the guy who's going to have 5 consecutive years of 8 to 10 sacks, I would say it might be Jared Verse, right? So I think there's varying different levels in a setting, in an IDP league, where the top-end edge guys score the same or comparable to linebackers. Where would you kind of put these tier of three with the top 2 linebackers? If you're talking about a league that the comparable scoring settings for DE edge guys with linebackers, would you have the linebackers, Colson and at the top, or would you have the DE at the top? How would you kind of, if you were going to put the top of the linebackers at the top of the edge guys, how would you kind of sort that in a league that they score pretty similar?
Yeah, in that similar setting, I have these 3 edge guys first before linebackers. I'm just big on getting a really difference-making edge. I think these guys have big potential, and I think it's harder to find production at that position, like off the waiver wire, or like you can find volume production at linebacker, guys that get in the way and fall into tackles or whatever. But edge rushers have to be good at what they do to be productive. You know what I mean? Like, it's just tough to find those types of guys, and I think these guys have the talent, opportunity, the draft capital to be really productive edge rusher, especially in your dynasty league. So I'm targeting these 3 guys first, and then I'm hitting the linebackers.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can totally understand that. The only other first round, depending on where we want to classify Darius Robinson, the other first round edge guy was Chop Robinson. Is he next on your rankings? And for me, he kind of almost stood alone, like almost like a separate tier, because I didn't really feel like that any of the day 2 guys had as much ceiling as him. Darius Robinson, I think, could be a really good, productive NFL player. I don't know how much it'll translate for fantasy viability on a week-to-week basis. Where do you kind of see the next? Is it Chop? Is he by himself? Do you have some other guys mixed in with him that you kind of would put on the same tier as him?
Yeah, I kind of have Chop by himself as well. He got the first round capital. Like, his first step is absolutely electric, best in the class, just elite get off. He's got that trait that it pops on tape. He's still developing his overall pass rush game and as a run defender, but he can straight up get after it off the edge. He lands in Miami where Jalen Phillips coming off the Achilles, Chubb had the ACL, I believe it was. And they brought in Shaquille Barrett, the veteran, to take some snaps. There's like opportunity for Robinson to get some run as a rookie too. And I think when everybody's healthy there, I think he's got like one of those designated pass rusher roles. Like, they could find a place for him. I think that's what he's best built for right away as he develops. Yeah, because he can straight up, pin his ears back and go off the edge. Like, that first step is just something else to watch on tape. So, but yeah, as far as like talent, draft capital, opportunity for looking at like the next guys, like, yeah, Robinson, I'm with you. Robinson kind of stands by himself there for me as well.
Now, in the industry, I haven't looked at a lot of other places. Is Darius Robinson mostly being grouped in with these edge guys, or is he being grouped in more like the D line or D tackle guys?
I'm seeing, I think it's like more towards defensive tackle.
Okay.
Like we did a mock draft, some of us on for the Football Guys staff, and I listed them as like edge DT because you're going to see a variance probably in platform, on various platforms and stuff. But I think we're kind of skewing towards defensive tackle right now until we kind of get some data and see some things. But yeah, I think I'm with you as well on him as far as like he could be a better NFL player than an IDP. Unless he does get like that defensive tackle designation and he's playing on the interior and he uses that size, speed, power on the inside, and maybe get a little time at 3 tech and get a little one-on-ones and do some things there. But overall, I'm kind of looking at him as like a better NFL player than IDP asset right now until we get a little more tape on him and see what Arizona does.
Yeah, to me, if he hits, his ceiling is a guy like Cameron Hayward in Pittsburgh, who's had a tremendous career and has been a great fantasy asset. But that type of player is Cameron Hayward is an outlier. Like, he's been consistently productive, but like, that's the kind of player I think he would have to be, that guy who kicks inside, who can play that power 5 tech defensive end type player. I think that's the kind of role for Darius Robinson. If we take it, we talked about Chop. We kind of mixed in there Darius Robinson a little bit. Who are your next couple edge guys? Because to me, this kind of goes, I like one guy from day 2 more than the rest. But then it kind of starts to become kind of like the linebacker group where it's like, okay, there's a variety of other guys. I think they're more just stash, wait and see. Is there any other guy that you're like, yeah, this guy's not that far behind Chop and then a drop off? Or do you think it's a big drop off right after we discuss Chop?
The next guy for me would be Chris Braswell. And he's close to me, close to Robinson for me. I would say I'm definitely targeting Chop first, but Alabama dude, he's He's got a nice opportunity in Tampa Bay as well, right? Yaya Diaby had a nice rookie campaign, finished well for him. Joe Shoyinka hasn't quite lived up to that first round selection there. I don't think he's quite hit what they were hoping for. Lost his job to Diaby last year. Shaq Barrett's now in Miami. So Braswell's got opportunity. He's a good player. I think he's got a good bull rush, ability to win with the dip and rip. Saw some nice hand usage. He brings a lot to the table, and I'm always gonna look at that. He played at Alabama. He got on the field, so he's a good player. And then next for me, so Braswell is my next target, and then like the next guy for me that I'm looking at is Braylon Trice for Atlanta. Yeah, Washington. He's a bigger frame with power. Speed to power, bull rush. He's an aggressive dude, a relentless effort, was just a freaking pressure machine. He had 76 pressures at Washington this year. And Atlanta needs help off the edge big time. So if he can make some noise, create some buzz here in training camp, he's a guy that, could get some run as a rookie too.
Yeah, Trice is a guy I have right after Braswell. I have Nealon and Trice as my next couple guys. Yeah. One guy I wanted to pick your brain on because I'm intrigued with him, and I haven't had any of my IDP rookie drafts yet, but I have some deep leagues that I'm very interested to get Alex Hunt from Philadelphia on my taxi squad, because I think it's going to take some time, but I think if he hits, he's a really high-end developmental pass rusher. We know the Eagles are loaded along the defensive tackle position with, high pedigree, college players that have came in. That Hunt is a guy who I'm really intrigued by. Do you see that with Hunt? Do you think he's a guy who's only going to be a situational guy and that might be his career? Obviously, right now, I'm not expecting a lot rookie year one. Is he a guy that you think could develop down the line? I mean, I know the story came out that Howie Roseman was like supposedly texting Dan Jeremiah not to talk about him because the Eagles desperately wanted him. If that's true, whatever. But regardless, they invested some decent draft capital in him, and the Eagles, moved around the board and had a great draft as usual. But Hunt is a guy that I find really intriguing, but he's more of just kind of like, it's going to take some time. And a lot of times fantasy players don't want to have patience. Hunt is a guy, though, I do think patience you could be rewarded for that patience. Are you there with me? Do you think I'm a little crazy? Like, where do you kind of stand on Hunt?
No, I'm with you on Hunt. Like, he's one of those guys, right, where you were talking about we got to take where he went in the draft into consideration. And he went in the third round, right, which is higher than I thought. And Howie Roseman's all over him, had to have him. Third round, he was a Houston Christian, right? Yep. Small school. He's an athletic dude. He's got long arms, and I like that he went higher than I expected. So it makes you take a piece of the puzzle, and he moved up my board, and I like taking a deep league stash at him. It's a little busy there as far as the Philly edge rushers go, but they like to mix them in, and I'd love to take a late stab at him as well and throw on your taxi squad and see he develops. He's got the traits, he's got the length, and a little bit of NFL coaching and mixing up with their guys there and Josh Sweat and Bryce Huff and see what can happen.
Yeah, I that's kind of, what I would recommend as well. Get him on that taxi squad. Just kind of let him sit there. If it's a deep taxi squad, you could hold them. Let's take this over to defensive tackle group. And I kind of I'll ask a two-part question, kind of open-ended. First, just maybe share the top of what your DT ranks look like. And second, where would you start to, if you were going to put some of the DT guys mixed in with the edge guys that we talked about, would you start considering the top of the defensive tackle guys after Chop Robinson, after Braswell, higher, lower? Obviously, I think we understand none of the defensive tackle guys are going to be blended in with the edge guys and be up there with Latu versus Turner. But like, where would you maybe take some of the top D tackle guys? Is it much further down, or do you see some of these guys with their intrigue potentially being in there with Robinson, Chop Robinson, Braswell, or would you even have them further down the board?
So for me, my number one defense tackle is Byron Murphy. And I have him ahead of Chop Robinson. If we're talking true position formats, we're starting to defend two defensive tackles. I think that's a scarce position where you can still get an advantage. And I think Byron Murphy is in a good spot to succeed. I like his game. He's a stout, quick, explosive gap penetrator that is a disruptor on the inside. I think he can play the pass and run well. And I like him going to Mike McDonald in Seattle. I think he's gonna get himself he's got himself a nice new weapon to deploy on the interior. And I think he profiles as a guy that could be, a nice X factor for you at the defensive tackle position, IDP. So I have him ahead of Chop if we're going true position overall ranks. We saw, I don't want to make like a comp or anything here, but we saw like Justin Madubuike flourish with Mike McDonald, right? If he uses those inside stunts and loops, and he gets his good players in the right position to get pressure. Like he uses those sim pressures, and it looks like he's rushing a bunch of guys, but he's really just bringing them from different levels, and guys are doing all kinds of cool stuff. And I'm really interested to see how he, turns out in Seattle. I think he's a real interesting dude. It might not be right away. It's a little crowded there, right? But I think he's a cornerstone piece for that defense for sure down the road.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I really like Murphy. Like before Atlanta stunned the world with their Michael Penix pick, I don't think it would have been crazy for Atlanta to take him all the way up at 8. Like that's how much I think of Byron Murphy and what he could bring at the next level. After Murphy, do you have the next group of DTs kind of in a tier together? And if so, how do you kind of sort out the Chris Jenkins, Braden Fisk, Jerzon Newton, Ruke Orhoro, Michael Hall? Those are kind of make up my next 5 in some capacity. How do you kind of sort through those guys? Is it one big tier? Is it kind of grouped off into 2 tiers? How do you kind of sort through those 5 guys?
Yeah, so like next, I kind of, I guess, looking at it, I kind of have a tier of Jerzon Newton and Braden Fisk. So I really like Newton. I like his game. He's really an interesting guy because he's what 6'2", 290. He moves well laterally, and he can you can use him along the fronts. He's a good pass rusher. He really can push the pocket. You can move him to the outside a little bit. He just finds ways to get pressure as a pass rusher. He's got active hands. He's physical. He's got a little bit of ability to bend if you move him out. He's an intriguing guy. These foot injuries he's dealing with are kind of a bummer. I don't know when we're gonna get to see him. He's buried right now, right behind Jonathan Allen, Teron Payne, two studs up front. Not bad guys to learn from. I think you're going to need patience, obviously, with Newton, but at some point, those guys are going to get pretty expensive. And, Newton you might be pretty happy to have him as a taxi squad guy in a year or 2 here. I think he's got really good game as far as being a productive pass rusher on the interior, which is what we love for IDP to get us those splash plays, especially if you're in like you said, DT premium league, or if you're starting 2 of them, whatever. I still really like Newton. And then Braden Fisk, he goes to the Rams. Obviously, there's a ginormous hole at defensive tackle with the man, the myth, the legend, Aaron Donald retiring. Nobody's ever going to fill those shoes, but there's snaps to be had. Fisk he's a dude. He plays with relentless effort. Motor runs hot. He's quick off the snap, and he's disruptive, penetrating gaps as well. I think him and Kobe Turner could be a nice duo along the interior. I think there's opportunity for him as well.
Yeah, I'm excited. Listen, the Rams made an aggressive move to get up and get Braden Fisk. They paired him with his former college teammate, Jared Verse.
Yes.
As someone who follows Florida State closely, I love that duo there that they kind of paired together. Was it worth it? The investment in terms of the future draft capital, that I guess be to be determined. But yeah, I kind of have Newton and Fisk in a tier after Murphy, and then I have Jenkins, Orhoro, and Hall in that kind of that next tier there. So we kind of see that similarly.
Yep.
Let's take this over to the secondary, the defensive backs. And I think the depth here is really strong in terms of, we understand that I think the most replaceable positions in IDP fantasy are the secondary. There's a lot of guys that are pretty similar, but I do think the rookie class here is pretty strong. And we've talked about it a little bit, like certain areas where you can kind of rank them in a variety of ways. I kind of see the secondary here, even towards the top, where you could kind of rank these guys. I know I went with guys who I think are going to get more of an immediate opportunity to be really significant. And those were the guys that I kind of pushed to the top of the board here in my own personal ranks. But you kind of got a blend here of guys that are, that those versatile nickel corners, safeties guys. You got guys like, is Cooper DeJean going to be an outside corner, and then he probably slides down the board? Or is he going to be more of like that, hybrid player, and then maybe that boosts his fantasy value? How does Tampa Bay use a guy like Tyke Smith? Like if it's the same way that he was played in college, there could be a lot of fantasy production there. And then you have guys like Cole Bishop and Tyler Nubin who are going to kind of get thrown into the fire, I think, and be potentially, major contributors right off the bat here. So there's a lot of ways, I think, to kind of sort through this. Cameron Kitchens is a really interesting guy. Before he tested poorly, if you looked at most like draft boards in January, he was probably safety 1 or safety 2 in most people's boards prior to the pre-draft process. And then I don't think anybody saw Jaden Hicks falling as far as he did. Like Dane Brugler and a lot of people, he was like, I think my number 2 safety on my board prior to the draft. I really liked this game. I think the Chiefs might have found a gem there, but it comes back to that 4th round draft capital and what it matters. So kind of maybe talk me through and share some thoughts on the secondary position here, how you have them ranked, guys that we got to take a little bit of a wait and see approach in terms of how they're deployed could impact their fantasy production for sure.
Yeah. If we're looking at the safeties, my top 2 guys, I got Cole Bishop and Tyler Nubin. I like Bishop. He's a really nice pairing, size, athleticism. He ran well at the combine. He can cover ground. He can get downhill in a hurry. He played up tight in the box slot area in college, which we love for IDP. There's a direct correlation from being up closer to the line of scrimmage to IDP production, right? That's what we're looking for. So I like him in Buffalo. Jordan Poyer's gone. Micah Hyde might come back, but we'll see. They gave Taylor Rapp a 3-year deal. They brought in Mike Edwards. I think Bishop might have to earn a job, but I don't think Mike Edwards is a huge mountain to climb. So I think there's some opportunity for him there. Tyler Nubin for the Giants, another guy, ideal size and length, excellent ball production, 13 career interceptions. The dude makes plays. I think he's solid against the run. And there's another spot for the Giants where there's opportunities. Xavier McKinney left for Green Bay. They got Jason Pinnock, Dane Belton, these guys. I mean, Nubin walks into a day 1 job for me, is the way I'm looking at it. I don't know about you. I like that spot. Javon Bullard for Green Bay. I'm a Green Bay fan. We needed a safety. I love that we picked up McKinney in free agency, and then we went out and really addressed that position in the draft. I drafted 3 of them. Bullard was our 2nd round pick. Bullard's a feisty dude. Not the biggest guy, but he's feisty, instinctual. He'll hit you. He can play safety. He's built to play nickel, so we'll see how that all works out. I'll be curious to see where he's running when they hit the field in training camp and mini camps and all that. Like you said, Kitchens, he goes to the Rams, right? There's opportunity there as well next to Cam Curl. I want to say Cam Kitchens again, the 2 Cams, right? Cam Curl's there now, so there's opportunity there, and I think you nailed it. Jaden Hicks to the Chiefs. They got a freaking steal in my book. He was my number 1 pre-draft safety. If we're looking from an IDP lens, the dude's built almost like a linebacker. He's a weapon against the run. He can play from depth. I'm still pretty surprised he slipped around 4 in Kansas City. It's like they needed more good players at an excellent value, right? And then he's a guy, right now it looks a little crowded there, but Justin Reed, I think he can get on the field as the 3rd safety when they do those 3 safety looks, similar to like Daniel Sorensen used to get there for Spags. And then Justin Reed's going to be a free agent next year. So if he's expensive, they have Hicks, who I think was an absolute steal. So that's kind of how I have the safety group. And you talked about Cooper DeJean. I want Cooper DeJean to play in the slot if we're talking IDP and get that cornerback designation, because like those slot guys are super productive and he can flourish in that role. And then if your league has, points for return yards, I have played a few like that. He's a baller as a returner, so he can get you some added points there too. So he could be really fun as that nickel defender, returning punts and kicks for us, I think.
Yeah, and with the new kickoff rules, I feel like fantasy is maybe gonna have to adjust for that. Like I feel like it might take a year or 2, but if we start seeing so much production and big plays and kickoffs really being a big factor in the NFL game, I do feel like you might start seeing a little bit more incorporation into fantasy leagues besides just like the special team touchdowns or return touchdowns. I do wonder if like return yardage stuff starts to become a little bit bigger in the fantasy landscape, and a guy like DeJean, obviously, with that would be intriguing for sure. Kyle, thank you so much for hopping on here. Always enjoy talking to you, picking your brain about these in the world of IDP. Please let the audience know where they can find you. If you're working on anything specific, heading towards the summer months here, anything you want to share with the audience, please let them know.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on, Paul. I really appreciate it, man. This was a lot of fun. You can find all my work over at footballguys.com. Rankings. We got some Dynasty rankings up there. I've been working on those. Redraft rankings have hit. A few rookie articles. Me and my buddy, Joseph Hagan, Joey the Tooth, IDP. We did a top 40 rookie big board. We tiered them and ranked them. And then we kind of gave player player blurbs. Wow, that's tough to get out. We kind of split them up and did a little write up. So that was a lot of fun. It's always fun collabing on stuff and getting other ideas and just like we did tonight, man. Just throwing names around, seeing where we fall. But yeah, you can find all my work there. And I don't post a ton on Twitter, but I'm around. If you ever have any questions, I'm happy to help if I can. And it's a fun time of year as OTAs hit and we take these like little blurbs and get excited, and then mini cap hits and we get excited, right? Start planting flags early and
anytime you see anybody that you like, everyone's like standing up on their pre-draft takes of how much they love the guy. But I mean, it just shows you the NFL is basically became a 365, 7 days a week, like 24/7. There's no off season really anymore.
No.
Like the pre-draft process became as big, if not bigger, than the actual season. And then even after that, then it is kind of, then we kind of run with all this rookie camps and mini camps, OTAs, and then people, now fantasy really never dies with best ball and everything. So it's really became a complete year-round industry and a sport. And for people who love it like us, obviously it's always something to talk about. Guys, make sure you're following Kyle and checking out all his great work over at Football Guys. Obviously, anyone who's been a longtime listener of Saturday Sunday knows the relationship I have with a lot of guys over at Football Guys. Tremendous work. Always one of my go-to resources for all things fantasy as well. So, on behalf of Kyle, on behalf of our sound tech engineer, David Nakano, and myself, thank you for joining us. And we look forward next time taking you from Saturday to Sunday.